So this is my personal ontology. And for my phrase, I would say that I'm very much in process. I think this is appropriate for, well, all of us because I think we're all in process, but I think for me especially, this year has been very pivotal for me as I'm really trying to figure out my footing. Um, so I think this is super appropriate. I wanted to touch on my cornerstones first and foremost because this is what makes me up. My work ethic's super important to me. It's something that I know that I possess, and that I think it'll take me to where I need to be. My faith, constantly challenged. It's been very challenged in this class, but I think it's just stronger for it because it makes me reassess who I am and where I'm at in my faith. Um, and I do start asking myself questions. I dig deeper into my Bible. I'm very thankful for that. Because usually I only receive confirmation that I'm where I'm supposed to be. My family, obviously, super important to me. I come from a blended family, so super interesting dynamics to say the least. But we are for sure a stronger family unit because of it. My loyalty and my empathy, two things that I know that I possess and that I think will take me um, far into my counseling career. Very thankful that those things are innate in me, as well as my generosity. This is something that I've employed since I was quite young. Um, I found that you will come across some hitches if you are a generous person, but I think mostly it's still a good thing to be. Um, I've learned that grace and patience, I think as long as it's being employed and received, it makes us better people. And I think it's at least important to be self aware of those things. Courage is not something I come by. Honestly, I think that's due to how I was raised. But I've I've learned to find my voice. And what I know I'm passionate about. I've learned how to advocate for myself. And it does take a lot of courage. And I found that it's really important to have. So I hope that as I grow older, that I'm able to be courageous while having grace in the process, because I think it's really easy to be courageous and be kind of mean about it as well, which I have discovered about myself. So I'm excited to continue to learn about courage and how to employ it successfully. And compassion, I think, goes hand in hand with empathy. I think this is something I come by honestly, and I'm excited to be able to use it professionally. I think as I'm growing older, I'm finding what has nourished me as an adult. Growing up, it wasn't my parents. They didn't demonstrate that it was important to maintain the things that nourish me. So I'm grateful to be learning as an adult that these things are important. Self care is super important. Your hobbies are super important. I listed the things that I find that are really important for me and that feed my soul. My Chuckleberry, that's my dog. She's my angel. I couldn't live without her. My horses, they take quite the financial toll, and quite the financial toll as well, but still very important for me to have in my life. I've tried to live without them many times, and it just doesn't quite work. My sense of humor somehow always remains intact, and I think this helps me honestly get through each and every day. And I'm glad that it's mostly received quite well at work and in the home. It's always important for me to be learning, whether or not I'm in school. I'm usually doing research. I'm trying to be more self aware of my culture, and I could do a little bit better about my politics. But I think making sure that you're armed with information is super important. I found that my alone time is extremely important. I've always lived with roommates or with my family, so ensuring that I have um, time to be by myself is super important. Affirmations, I think myself along with most people, we all have our insecurities, so I think it's really important to ensure that we're taking care of ourselves mentally and emotionally by coming up with daily affirmations, being gracious with ourselves, super important. I'm going to touch on that for forever and ever and ever, I think, because we're never going to be perfect, and we have to extend ourselves grace. I think it's easier to extend it to other people, but it's very, very important to be gracious with ourselves as well. We're not perfect. We're going to fall short often. So I think this is important to keep in mind. Encouragement from others and from ourselves, extremely important. Sometimes we have to seek that out. Sometimes we have to go to our friends and say, "Hey, look, I think I need some help. I need you to tell me how well I'm doing, or what I could be doing better." Relationships, extremely important. I think while my alone time is very near and dear to me, my relationships with my friends and my family, it trumps everything. I couldn't make it through without them. So I think keeping this in the forefront is imperative. I think throughout this class, I really had to reflect on what's impacted me, and I think Demotte's book, Traveling Mercy, is really hit home for me. Um, she grew up with, you know, when you read her book, it doesn't sound like she grows up with that much adversity. However, as you progress into the book and you see her struggles as a young adult, I personally started to reflect on her past and how her parents chose to parent her. Um, and it seemed like it made quite the impact on her adult life. So these are just a few of the impacts that have been made on my life and how it's impacted my trajectory. Animals, obviously, super super important. That is day in day out. It's like really all I care about at the time. Nature, constantly outside. I think it's really important to be out in nature. I think it's super easy to stay cooped up, watching TV, reading books, whatever. But I think nature is a pretty homeopathic therapy. My mentors, obviously, super important. They've helped hold me accountable. I still seek them out day in and day out. The hardships that I faced, I've been pretty privileged, and I'm really grateful for that privilege. But I've certainly encountered some growing pains, and I think it's made me a little callous. But I think mostly it's just made me wiser, and I think as an adult, I'm starting to soften again, which I'm really grateful for. When I was a kid, my dad left when I was an infant. And this impacted me greatly, obviously. And I don't think that story is not unique, especially I think the 90s. I think that was actually quite common. In that, my mom was extremely resilient, and she really demonstrated that you can get through nearly everything. It's going to take a lot of commitment. She did have to go find some Jesus, but that saved her. So, and I'm glad that was demonstrated to me when I was quite young. Um, Through that, we did live through some poverty. I think for most of my childhood, we just scraped by, and there was a lot of charity, which I'm very grateful for. I really believe in that. I really believe in our community. Um, I grew up in the church and in private school, and I think these really intimate communities, they know a lot about you, and they're willing to support you through um, your hardships. I just don't think we could make it through without our community. So I'm really grateful for that. When I was a kid, I did a lot of reading because TV was pretty much off limits. I think this impacted me greatly. Super thankful that my mom never grounded me for my books. Um, my parents, they grew up in pretty loosely structured households, and I think they wanted something different for their kids, as it had actually a pretty negative impact on the way they grew up. So I grew up in a very conservative household. Growing up, this was pretty tough. I think it was my household was more conservative than I think anyone else that I knew. And while I still hold a couple grudges against it, mostly I'm really grateful. I think this created a lot of self awareness. I walk a pretty fine line, um, but my moral compass is intact, and I'm very, very grateful for that. So when we studied Aristotle and we touched on all the virtues, we also touched on all of the vices, which I thought was super interesting, and very important to note. I didn't really want to make this last, but this was my final slide. And I do think it's very important to be vulnerable and open about our shortcomings so that we can improve on them. So I found that I do have a short temper. That's something that I've been working on for forever. I think this is just something I come by honestly. I can be very quick to judge. It's not fair. And this is something that I am also constantly working on. I usually have to say it out loud. I shouldn't judge. I can become very easily discouraged. I'm grateful that I am surrounded by people um, who are constantly lifting me up. They are constantly encouraging me and telling me that I'm very capable, um, and that my trajectory is it's up, and I'm super grateful for those people, or else I don't think that I could have even made it as far as I have. Sometimes I can be self indulgent. I'm a single person. I've been single for a long time. I don't have any kids. So while I think this is mostly appropriate, sometimes I do have to take a beat and make sure that I am inclusive of all people. Self deprecating, it's kind of a big word. This was actually on Aristotle's vice list. I don't remember. I don't know if you guys remember the diagram of his, but it was on the right hand side, and self-deprecating was listed. I think this is just generally. I used it to highlight our insecurities because I think we all have them. Sometimes I tend to dote on my insecurities, which I don't think is fair to myself, or to others because I'm sure that others suffer for it. Sometimes I lack foresight. I think sometimes I'm extremely generous with my time and my energy. And while I think this is mostly a very good trait of mine and that I'm never not going to be proud of, sometimes I do lack foresight when it comes to my generosity, and then I become discouraged or disappointed. Um, Trauma dictated action, that's kind of a big word too. I think I just have triggers just like we all do. This is something that I'm working on. I'm trying to be more thoughtful of because want to, I don't want to, I don't want to use my baggage to impact those around me. So I have to be really careful about that. And also, I don't want to shortchange myself. So it's just something that I personally just have to be aware of. And sometimes my actions are shame driven. I grew up in a very conservative household, as I've mentioned. It was very religious, and some of the actions that I employ today, I I always have to take a beat and remind myself that it's not something to be ashamed of. Some of the things that I'm thinking or the some of my actions, I shouldn't be ashamed of them. So I think that's super important. So I think this presentation really rounds me out in vulnerable ways that I think is I think they're just really important to note. So I'm glad. I think this class has really promoted a lot of self awareness, and it's really challenged me to think about myself and where I'm at today, and where my faith is. Really thankful to have studied some of the philosophers. It was really interesting that I didn't know much at all about the philosophers listed, aside from Jesus and Moses. Um, so in all, I think this class is really it's taught me a lot, and it's challenged my faith in good ways. I think the textbooks have been really good. So anyway, I hope you enjoyed this presentation, and I look forward to watching yours. All right.